Joining us now for more on this is Matt Mowers. He's a former senior White House advisor, Department of State. Thank you so much for speaking to us, Matt Mowers. Let me begin by asking you, it's a very, very shocking incident that has taken place. What's going on through your mind as we speak about the tragic assassination of Charlie Kirk that has sent shockwaves not just in the United States, but across the world?
Yeah, I mean, it's terribly sad. I mean, I know Charlie. I've met him over the years. We've worked alongside each other at times, and it's just terribly heartbreaking. I mean, here's a young political leader, political figure, a private citizen, right? Not an elected official, not someone who's held office, but someone who's just advancing causes and ideas that he truly believed in. Trying to have an open dialogue at a college campus, which should be, the place, if you think of any place where the free speech should be protected, it's certainly on a college campus where you want to have open debate and dialogue. And then to see what some individual who I'm sure, I mean, while we don't know much about who the shooter is, I'm sure, was just targeting Charlie purely because they disagreed with him. It's just really terribly sad for his wife, for his two young children, who now have to grow up without a father. Charlie was someone who had a remarkable relationship with President Trump. His son Don Jr. in particular had been in the trenches of the political fights, and now for him to have just gone out the way he did yesterday, it's remarkably sad for not just those who knew him, not just those who agreed with him, but for all people who believe that violence has no place in our political discourse, and that ultimately free speech must be protected.
Absolutely, and like you rightly said, this was not the only place or the only time that he visited a college campus. This is something that he would engage in regularly and in fact engage in discussion, engage in debate and try and put his views forth in a reasonable manner. But while he chose to exercise his free speech to that route, there were others or someone else who has chosen the gun. What are the implications of this in that sense for the politics in United States?
Well, you would hope right now that better angels can be found, and that as Americans and certainly as citizens, wherever you live, can understand that we can both disagree with someone's politics and disagree with someone politically, yet still find friendship with them, camaraderie with them, and understand that ultimately we still have shared ideals and values, and whether that's love of our family, love of our nation, love of our world, love of our way of life. Those are things that need to be protected. It's certainly going to drive some heat on both sides of the political aisle right now, but hopefully political leaders can find ways to quiet those tensions down.
Right. And you've been associated with presidential campaigns in the past, but the campaign that we saw last year did see a lot of vitriolic comments coming in, particularly, of course, comments coming in against President Trump. We all know the famous quote of Biden about Trump being put in a bullseye. Now, that was last year. But what role do you think that these hateful comments could have played in the case of Charlie Kirk?
Yeah, I mean, you've seen this increase in violent rhetoric going out over the last several years in American politics, and you've seen that manifest, from two assassination attempts of President Trump last year to, state legislators in Minneapolis, in Minnesota, to, of course, now Charlie Kirk, to a whole host of additional acts of political violence and attempted violence. Unfortunately, yesterday's was a successful attempt, but we have seen others who have tried. It has been ongoing now, really not even just in the United States, but throughout our politics across the world. I was in the State Department in President Trump's first term, serving as senior White House advisor in 2017, 18, and 19. And, it was not uncommon to see this type of rhetoric and then sometimes that activity around in other countries. But in the United States, we prided ourselves in our democratic institutions, our belief in free speech, our belief that ultimately there is a common ability to have disagreements and discord, but in a appropriate way, and do it in the public square, in the town square, to disagree, through free speech or at the ballot box, not through violence. And in the last few years, we've now seen this manifest. And so it's going to be incumbent upon a lot of leaders, to quiet the tensions right now, to try to calm down the rhetoric and to try to bring people together.
Right. I'd like to quote to you what has been stated by the Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban. He has said that Charlie Kirk's death is the result of the international hate campaign waged by the progressive liberal left. This is what led to the attacks on Robert Fico, on Andrej Babis, and now Charlie Kirk. We must stop the hatred. We must stop the hate-mongering left. Do you agree with what Mr. Orban says when he blames the so-called progressive liberal left?
Well, it does seem like in the last, let's call it 10 years or so, the rhetoric has emanated primarily from the left, who are now calling, whether it's President Trump or in the case of, Prime Minister Orban, where they say they don't go after them over their ideas. They don't attack these two political leaders over their policies, but they attack them personally. They say that democracy will no longer exist if they win in the democratic process. They say that they're taking actions which they equate to the atrocities of the Holocaust. This is the type of rhetoric that is undermining, civil discord here. It's fomenting political violence. And I'm not saying it's exclusively one side or the other, because it's not. But the last few years has certainly emanated more from the left towards conservative political leaders, particularly President Trump, and the case of Prime Minister Orban as well, who has felt that type of anger from the left.
Is there any specific comment or insightful remark against Charlie Kirk that comes to your mind, that stands out, which could have possibly led to such an incident happening? Any specific comment that you can recollect for our viewers?
Oh, specific comments may have led it. I mean, we don't know yet what truly led to this, right? As far as, what kind of a specific comment may have triggered someone off to do something as awful as try to take another person's life over political speech. You have seen, though, from particularly liberal news organizations in the United States, MSNBC first and foremost among them, who often highlighted Charlie Kirk as what they would call kind of an enemy of their ideals, of the progressive left-wing movement. And so, those types of things, generally, I don't think it's one single comment that sets someone off from the type of rhetoric we're seeing. It's the culmination of nearly a decade now, the dehumanization of conservative leaders, who through the media prism, they'll always try to clip one comment that they disagree with and then try to create this outrage machine. That's the kind of thing that's actually undermining the confidence people have in the ability to have these civil types of conversations.
Right. And what do you think this does for the entire debate surrounding free speech in the United States? Because this is a very clear case of someone being murdered for their views, or at least appears to be so.
Yeah, no, look, I mean, this is going to be the fundamental discussion right now. I think the one thing that gives me a lot of confidence right now, if I have to look for a silver lining, and I've had to be an optimist right now, is the fact that you even have Democratic leaders largely, I'm not saying, totally, but largely a lot of Democratic elected officials coming out and admiring the fact about what Charlie Kirk was doing, that he was out there on a college campus in open venue, encouraging people to come up and disagree with him, encouraging debate and dialogue, encouraging, strong discussions. I mean, free speech isn't always nice speech. It's not always, the ability just to be pleasant, but it's free speech. It's to challenge ideas. It's to encourage debate and dialogue. And you are seeing leaders of both sides of the aisle right now, at least at this moment, less than 24 hours after this tragedy has happened, come out and recognize the fact that that was what Charlie Kirk was trying to do, and recognizing the fact that that's something that we need to encourage as a society. We need to encourage open dialogue. And so I hope that if there is a lasting legacy of what Charlie had tried to accomplish over his way too short of life, that it is this fundamental belief in free speech and dialogue and debate, and that as Americans, and really as all of those of us who live in a democratic society, are willing to protect those rights, to encourage that discussion. And I hope maybe, just maybe, we're actually going to start talking to each other again. I think because of the media system, because of our current politics, you have a lot of people who don't want to engage with people who disagree with them. You're seeing folks who are moving to communities where everyone's going to try to look like them, sound like them, and agree with them. That's not what makes a democratic society work. It's not going to be what ensures that we have the fundamentals necessary to can move democracy forward for another generation. And so hopefully, we all take it seriously, start talking to people we disagree with and try to change their mind. It doesn't mean you have to go in and try to agree with them. Try to, use the power of an argument to win them over. But maybe we'll all take on and start doing that a little bit more as a result of Charlie's legacy.
Right. Also, isn't it true that he is somebody who's also criticized by the far right, who have actually questioned his own, conservative credentials? And I'm asking you this at a time when it's unclear who really pulled the trigger.
I hadn't heard much of that. So, I mean, look, anyone who's in public life is going to have critics on all sides of the spectrum. I mean, it's just how it happens, right? Um, I have nowhere near the pedestal that Charlie did, or the soapbox that Charlie did. But I'll go on television and say something, and all of a sudden you start getting threats thrown into you from all sides of the aisle. You were too pro-Trump, you weren't pro-Trump enough. So it's possible these things could have happened. I hadn't heard anything specifically though about that. I think Charlie truly inspired a generation of young conservative leaders. He brought life to the young conservative movement, and really did it by pulling it up from the bootstraps with an organization that was nothing more but a dream about 15 or so years ago when he started Turning Point USA, and to what it's become, a must-attend event for young conservatives, but also powerful politicians, the President of the United States, cabinet members, and states and U.S. senators to come to an event to approach and to win over young voters. It's just something the conservative movement had not done, and he really revolutionized it. And so I think that's going to be his lasting legacy in so many ways.
Right. And what are some of your views on some of these comments which have been doing the rounds, which many consider controversial? For instance, if he was asked if his 10-year-old daughter or a minor child ought to keep a child if she became pregnant due to rape, he had answered that the child would be delivered. He had also been asked about guns, saying that it's worth having that cost of, unfortunately, having some gun deaths every single year so that we can have the Second Amendment protect our other God-given rights. That's a prudent deal. What are your views on these comments that he's made?
Well, look, Charlie was a principled conservative, right? And he did not allow his principles to change even in, hypotheticals. He believed that, first and foremost, his faith and the Bible, which was very personal to him. He knew it well, too. He wasn't one of these folks who claimed to be religious and didn't do the work. Like, he had read it, he understood it, and it was part of what he carried on. And you can see that in his discussions with not just conservatives, but he would go on with California Democrat Governor Gavin Newsom on his podcast, or with Bill Maher, who is a liberal comedian and talk show host, and he would actually use his understanding of his own faith and religious texts to defend his argument. He also was a firm believer in the Constitution that the founding fathers of the United States had put in place. He was a strong supporter of all of its amendments and all of its contents, not cherry picking each. And so, I'm not surprised by those things he said. He truly took his beliefs seriously. It's part of the reason why he was so confident walking into a room of people who disagreed with him to have that type of debate, is because he felt so tethered to his principles out of those documents, and then out of his faith and unabiding love for the United States as well. And so that's really what it was getting at the core of there.
But do you think that Charlie Kirk could have also been assassinated because of his close ties with President Trump?
I mean, look, we don't know why exactly he was killed yesterday, right? We don't know if it was some, all the information that's out right now is that seemingly is a young person, a young male. I think the FBI news conference that just happened about half an hour ago said that the suspect or the person of interest seemed like they were potentially college age, so it's a younger male shooter. Outside of that, we don't know a lot. But look, Charlie was definitely well connected to President Trump. He was a frequent visitor in the White House. He was a key ally on the campaign in Donald Trump's return to political power. You saw the shift in young voters and how they voted for Donald Trump, particularly young men who went from voting overwhelmingly Democrat and for Joe Biden in 2020 to swinging overwhelmingly for Donald Trump in 2024. That was the culmination of his life's work to try to find that type of change and actually build that type of support for conservative candidates like Donald Trump. And so, it would not be lost on anyone about his relationship with the president or the president's family and the political movement that brought the president to power. And so whether that factored into the shooter's thought process or not, I mean, we can all make assumptions and think it would. We, of course, don't know the details, but no doubt everyone knew that he had a close relationship with the president.
Yes, and you mentioned the FBI, news conference a short while earlier. But what does it say about law enforcement that we really don't know who the killer is for sure, and the fact that the killers have not been nabbed yet? It's been close to 24 hours now.
So the FBI seem to be implying that they may know who this is, but they'd gone through a lot of footage. I mean, cases like this are complicated, right? I mean, Charlie Kirk was not an elected official. He wasn't the president of the United States or a vice presidential candidate. He didn't have a Secret Service detail. He was a private political figure. I mean, he was a public figure, but he was a private citizen. So he had, private security that had been hired. But this was an outdoor venue, which are very difficult and tough to secure. They're also very difficult to know exactly who's coming and going. Now, the one thing about this is it was on a college campus where you have a lot of video cameras. You have also had a lot of people around. And so based upon what the FBI came out and said just a short while ago, they overnight reviewed that footage. They have a picture of this suspect, and it sounds like they're getting pretty close, running a lot of technology right now and software analysis right now over this shooter's face. They likely are going to find out who it is. And they've said if somehow they don't have absolute certainty about who it is, they'll call on the public and ask for tips. So look, it sounds like they're working overdrive right now. You would just think because, it's a political event, somehow they're going to have total control over perimeter and know exactly where they are. But again, Charlie was a private citizen, and this was private security. He wasn't a public elected official. And so it's just a very different and difficult type of environment to ensure that there's security around.
Also, I'd like to ask you, as somebody who's worked closely with the State Department, we've seen a lot of rhetoric between India and the United States, particularly on the issue of the tariffs that have been imposed by US on India. Over the weekend, we saw a little bit of that dialing down with President Trump and Prime Minister Modi's comments. Where do you look at the India-US relationship? But while the two countries have a lot in common and the tariff negotiations have once again begun, there has been a bit of a rough patch over the last few weeks. How do you look at what has transpired?
Look, President Trump and Prime Minister Modi clearly have a close personal relationship. I mean, it's, let's just go back to when Prime Minister Modi was in the United States, campaigning in Texas, talking to the Indian diaspora. I mean, there is just such a strong, close relationship here. You look at the fact that Vice President Vance, visited India as one of his first trips abroad as vice president. There's a close relationship here. But look, President Trump has expressed the fact that he is frustrated that the Russia-Ukraine conflict has not ended. He is now coming around to the belief that President Putin is the one who is actually begrudgingly slow walking a pathway towards peace. And he's been looking for additional angles and additional leverage points to apply to encourage President Putin to actually come to the negotiating table in good faith. It's no secret that Russian energy exports predominantly have been going to India lately. And so I think, President Trump has two different poles right now. He has his close personal relationship with Prime Minister Modi, which he cares about. You also have the American economy, obviously deeply intertwined with the Indian economy. But he then also has this desire to try to drive a peace agreement between Russia and Ukraine. And he's trying to find a way to deconflict all those different angles right now.
Yeah, but the point is that when it comes to Russian energy being brought by India, there's a whole lot more being bought by China. There's a whole lot more being bought by the EU, and United States itself does a lot of business with Russia in terms of buying uranium, plutonium, etc. to the extent of about $2.5 billion a year. So what experts here in India are saying is that there's a bit of a hypocrisy in slapping those tariffs only on India when the reality of the rest of the world doing business with Russia continues.
Right. I mean, there's obviously still very high tariffs on China as well as they're working through different agreements, and you've got several different sets of tariffs that have been applied to China as well. And look, I think President Trump and Xi Jinping have also been having some discussions around this as well. But look, you saw both Prime Minister Modi and President Trump come out and say they intend to meet in the coming amount of time. There's some speculation maybe they'll even be meeting on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly in 2 weeks. Although President Trump is still making final determinations about how he's going to approach the UN General Assembly this year. And so I would expect that you're going to see this dialogue continue. And it's a little surprising for most observers. I mean, if you go back just a few months ago, Secretary Bessent, the U.S. Secretary of the Treasury, and Howard Lutnick, the U.S. Secretary of Commerce, came out and often were saying that they thought a U.S.-India agreement would be one of the first trade agreements that would actually be completed. And now here we are several months later, seeing many highs and lows. I think we can get these things back on track. I've had conversations with folks in the administration. They're optimistic about where the conversations can go, but they also want to try to ensure that all of our partners are working towards finding a peace agreement as well, which would be in everyone's interest, of course.
Matt Mowers, thank you so much for taking the time out and speaking to us here at Times Now.
Thank you so much.